Good evening. I'm Carmen Hernandez, a member of our local Dubuque League of Women Voters. I would like to welcome the audience here in the City Council chambers and the television audience to this Iowa State Legislature Candidates Forum. The League is a nonpartisan political organization which encourages citizen participation in government. Membership is open to any citizen 16 years of age or older. We would like to thank the candidates for their participation this evening and for their invaluable gift to all of us by being candidates for public office. Unfortunately, 3 candidates have decided not to join us this evening. We are sorry the public will miss their responses to the voters' questions. Running for Iowa Senate District as a Democrat is Thomas Townsend. Running for House District 65 as a Democrat is Carolyn Wiezorek. Running for Iowa House District as a Democrat is Lindsey James, and running for Iowa House District 72 as a Democrat is Chuck Eisenhart. We thank each of these candidates for taking their time to share their priorities and plans for their offices with their constituents. Each candidate will have 1.5 minutes to answer each question and will be reminded of the time remaining with warning cards and finally by the bell. They will have 2 minutes for closing statements at the end of the forum. There will be a short period for rebuttal if desired. We will begin with the Senate race. Tom Townsend, why are you a candidate for Iowa legislature, and what difference will your presence make?
First, I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for having this forum here tonight. I think it's very valuable that everyone gets an opportunity to see and hear from us candidates. So why am I running for Senate District 36? It probably started quite a few years ago when I was in the Navy. I was on nuclear-powered submarines, and I went through the nuclear power program. And I learned at that point what difference it makes if you have good representatives and if you don't. And then, years ahead, as a union electrician, I've been down every road pretty much. I was on workers' compensation. It really bothered me that I hurt my shoulder. It really bothered me that my benefits weren't paid while I was on workers' compensation, and I felt like something needed to be done about that. And and then you move forward to 2017 and the attacks on all the different workers that were executed, making the workers' comp law even worse. Stripping people's rights to collectively bargain, just so much bad legislation that's gone on out there for the average everyday working person. So I feel like how I'm gonna make a difference is I've been that guy. I've been on workers' comp, I've been on job sites, I've had my struggles through my life and came out on the other end, and I feel like I'm pretty empathetic, and I also work pretty hard to help feed the less fortunate in Dubuque.
Ms. Wiezorek?
Thank you. I would like to echo my thanks to the League of Women Voters and also to the people who've come out tonight to participate in our democracy. I have not been very political. I'm fairly new to the political game. While I've always read the newspaper, followed the news, always voted, always caucused, I just wasn't, I was busy. I had a busy life. But when I did start paying more close attention, I was really alarmed. I, started getting involved, and I started following some of the laws that were being passed in Iowa, and I was looking and seeing some of the steps backwards we were taking as far as freedoms, as far as support for the middle class, and it was really bothering me. So when I stepped up and tried to get more information, I attended the Cracker Barrels. The last 2 years, I have attended the Cracker Barrels sponsored by nonpartisan groups, and I was eager to ask questions and get information from my representative and my senator, and neither of them were there at any of them last year or this year. So I was very frustrated by that I didn't have that opportunity. In addition, I went on the Iowa legislative website to follow and track some of the bills that were being passed. And when I went into some of the public hearings and where public input was being allowed, there just weren't, the representatives weren't following what the people were asking for.
Representative James, please.
Thank you. I also want to echo my colleagues' thanks already to the League of Women Voters Forum and also to Carmen for moderating this conversation. I appreciate it. Before I respond to the answer specifically, I did want to tell everyone in the room, it's my birthday today. Oh, I know we're not allowed to clap, but following those rules, I wanted to say you are inadvertently celebrating with me tonight, and so thank you for that. It's an honor to be your state representative, and it's an honor to be here in front of the public. You have important questions. We want to hear them and we want to respond to them. We want to meet the needs of our constituents. So thank you so much. So most of you know my story. I've been your state representative for the last 6 years now already. But one of the reasons why I jumped into running in the first place was I'm a mom with, when I started this, 2 young kids at the time now are going into, or just started the 6th grade and freshman year. It's just going so fast. But part of why I got into this, because I served as a mom and in my working life as an ordained Presbyterian pastor, serving as a college chaplain, I did a lot of work bringing people together across difference. And after 2016 and seeing the political polarization, I thought to myself, maybe the skill set as a chaplain, working with all different kinds of people, could actually translate, and I could work to bring people together across difference to do what is good and right and just for Iowa. So that's why I jumped in, and it has been a wild and beautiful journey since. Thank you.
Representative Eisenhart, please.
Thank you. The opportunities for civic engagement by average citizens are few and far between with social media and the dominance of network TV and the big money that goes into that. So appreciate what the League is doing every other year to continue this tradition of letting grassroots people have an opportunity to interact with us. I hope to continue bringing my knowledge and experience to the table. Many of you may know I worked for the Labor Management Council in town for 17 years, worked with both employers and unions on issues critical to them and the community. Before that, I was a newspaper investigative reporter, so I learned a thing or two about research and writing, communicating effectively. But I get the most enjoyment out of helping average citizens problem solve with state government and getting some action on some of the issues that they face in their personal cases and issues for themselves and their family, and helping them navigate that process. And most importantly, helping people engage directly in the political process, the governing process. You've heard me say before, we need to gang up, show up, speak up, and help and do that when and where the decisions are being made. So I really enjoy helping people figure out how to do that at the Capitol and directly impacting decisions. We've seen how that works, and hopefully we'll have a chance to address some of those issues today.
Thank you. So this is a question for all the candidates, and we'll go in order again. Are campaign finance rules, or lack of them, a problem in Iowa?
Well, that's an interesting question. I believe yes. I believe that it's pretty absurd the amount of money that people are raising for these races and the amount of dark money that pours into some of these races for office that really doesn't pay that much money. And obviously all that stuff comes. There's an expectation with those huge contributions that come into some of these races. So yes, I believe it is a problem.
I also agree that it's a problem. I think especially the dark money, I think money that can be given anonymously and in huge amounts. Like you said, I think there could be very nefarious reasons for giving that money. I I think that the amount of money, we have an unlimited amount of, I mean, anyone can give us any amount of money. People don't always do that, though. No. I just think that it would be nice to have campaign finance reform that would include a set amount of money, a cap perhaps, that each candidate would be allowed to use. And I think that would make elections more fair, and I think we also would get better legislation out of that.
Thank you. Representative James, please, yeah.
The public deserves to understand where their candidates come from and where they stand on particular positions, and understand who they're putting their deep trust in to do responsible work at the Capitol. With the amount of special interest money and with the amount of lack of regulations around campaign strategies, there is a lot of misrepresentation and misinformation that gets thrown out into the communities. Campaign finance reform would be a significant solution to actually help the public get back to a place where they're getting, accurate information about who they're voting for. So I have put forward campaign finance reform legislation at the Capitol in the past, and with a number of different possible solutions. Some of my colleagues have already named some of those, but capping the amount, regulating dark money. I put in a bill last year that passed the Iowa House around AI-generated images. Now with the advances in technology, we're seeing that the ability to have images being doctored and inaccurate in their depiction and misleading is another significant problem. So there's a lot of different ways that we can approach this, and I am happy to be a supporter and an advocate for campaign finance reform.
Representative Eisenhart.
I think it's obvious that the dominance of big money, super PACs, independent expenditures and campaigns is infiltrating state and local politics. And it's one of the reasons people feel like their votes don't matter anymore, that the fix is in. I said when I first ran, and I continue to say it today, if I show up in the morning and I see 2 notes on my desk, one from a constituent, whether or not they gave me money, and the other, a lobbyist from a PAC that gave me a big check, it's the constituent that's going to get the first call, and the lobbyist can wait. I think those need to be our priorities. I've authored legislation that creates incentives for candidates to raise money locally from their constituents so they have a chance to compete. And I think when we see the campaign reports come out next week, we'll find that there has been, in my race in particular, some very significant outside money that's being used to distort what's happening in my race. And so pay attention to those stories when they come out next week.
Thank you. Our next question, again, is also directed to all candidates, and we'll start with Mr. Townsend. According to the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis, Iowa is the 5th worst state for personal income growth in the nation. Would you support raising the minimum wage statewide?
I would support raising the minimum wage, but honestly, the minimum wage at this point is such a joke. It would have to go up by a lot because, where it's at today, nobody's paying minimum wage hardly, so if we're going to raise minimum wage, it would have to go up a substantial amount. And then I'd like to see it also tied in with the cost of living, so that it was, it would go up with the cost of living. What we really need to do is find multiple ways to make Iowa not a low wage state, because right now it is a low wage state. And we lose, my trade as an electrician, we lose electricians all the time to other places in the country where, they're paying more money, and on top of that, with the changes they've made to some of the labor law and the unemployment laws in the last 7 or 8 years, we've got people that are leaving and not coming back. I've had people tell me, if they're working in Illinois, they can draw more unemployment for longer if they get laid off. But in the meantime, they're also making a lot more money than they'd be making here.
Thank you. Ms. Wieserek.
Yes, I agree. I do think that we need to raise the minimum wage. I also agree that strengthening unions is key to bringing up wages as well as benefits. I think that the benefit piece contributes greatly to families' income and families' well-being. So I think that would also be important, and I think strengthening unions is one of the ways to do that.
Ms. Lindsay.
Thank you for the question. I think all of us candidates are out knocking doors and hearing from people every single day that some of the financial and economic realities people are facing are truly staggeringly difficult. And that data point right there that you said that we're the 5th worst state in the country for personal income growth is part of what's contributing to some of our economic hardships. And what I would argue is that we're not paying our people. We need to continue to raise wages, and as Tom said, fix that to, cost of living increases. And we need to prop up our labor community. I mean, we have not we, Republican-controlled legislature has stripped collective bargaining rights. They've made massive changes to workers' compensation. They have made massive changes to unemployment, all which impact our everyday Iowa family who's out there working so that they can send their kids to school, so that they can, go get a new job, so that they can have kids and put them in a child care that they feel safe at, and then, build the life that they really dream about. And so part of what we need to be serious about as a state is recruiting and retaining our workforce. We have, again, some of the worst brain drain, if you will, young people leaving our state for economic opportunities in other places. So I would argue that we need to make working conditions stronger for working families, raise the minimum wage, and make sure that businesses and companies and any workplace has fair wages.
Representative Eisenhart.
Of course, we need to raise the minimum wage, and Iowa should move quickly to do that. I think we're going to need to see change at both the legislative and governor's level to do that. It creates an important floor for all workers, but it also, in part, creates an incentive, which many of us, I think on a bipartisan level, agree we need to find work. People need to find work meaningful, and if it doesn't pay, it means that they can't sacrifice the public benefits they're receiving to take that low-wage job. And so it'll benefit taxpayers as well to see increases in minimum wage. It also distorts our tax system. To the extent that low-wage workers aren't able to pay taxes, it means when we see tax cuts, as we have in the last several years, the benefits of that go disproportionately to the rich, because they're the ones paying taxes. When fully phased in, the 22 tax cuts that we approved, 50% of the benefit of those will go to the top 5% of taxpayers. That would change for the middle class if we started with raising the minimum wage.
Thank you. The next question, we'll start with Ms. Wieserek, please, and we'll go through, but again, it is a question directed to all the candidates. Do you believe the 2020 presidential election was fair, and whether or not it was stolen? Will you accept the outcome of all local, state, and federal elections?
Yes, I believe it was fair, and yes, I will accept the outcome of all elections this time. I think that we have done, as a society, there's been a disservice to all of us in the misinformation and disinformation that has caused people to question our election security, and I think that harms our democracy. So yes, I will.
Thank you. Ms. James.
Thank you. My answer, not surprisingly, is also yes. I believe that the election was fair, and that election integrity is really important to uplift and make sure that the public feels confident in the process of voting. I will tell you, I know that last night there was a forum where the county auditor, Kevin Dragato, spoke about the process of elections, and he is an incredible person who is deeply committed to making sure that elections are free and fair, and that there is a process in place that is transparent and accountable, and that every person can walk into that election office with confidence. And so I'm really happy to say that I'm very proud of the work that Kevin Dragato in the County Auditor's Office has done. And I'm very, very proud to support his candidacy for his reelection bid, but also want everyone to know that I will be showing up at that election office early because early voting starts on October 16th. And please, democracy belongs to all of us. So please take care and, participate in those elections.
Thank you. Representative Eisenhart, please.
The answers, of course, are yes, it was fair, and yes, we could accept the outcome for all the reasons Representative James just outlined, especially in Dubuque County. The claims that there are distortions or much less fraud in our electoral system are just overstated at best and fictional at worst. It's unfortunate that our Republican colleagues aren't here to answer this question. In 2020, after the end of that election, I crafted a resolution signed by many Democrats, but not one Republican, stating that Joe Biden was the legitimately elected president of the United States. Not one Republican was willing to sign that. The majority leader of the House refused to have the resolution read into the system, claiming that it was a settled issue. But since then, I'm not aware of one highly placed Republican official or elected official in Iowa who's made the statement that that election was fair or that they would accept similar outcomes in the future.
Thank you. Mr. Townsend.
Yes, obviously, yes is the answer. The election was fair. I think if it wasn't, there would be more proof of massive voter fraud, which there isn't any proof of. I feel like, this is one of the core issues of our Constitution is free and fair and open elections, and what they're trying to do is intimidate people to stop them from voting, and I think it should almost be criminal, in my opinion. And I feel like, like I say, for people that run around talking about the Constitution all the time, they sure seem to like to disregard it when it works for them.
Thank you. This is also election related. We'll begin with Representative James this time. What is your opinion about ranked choice voting?
Thank you for the question. This is a hard one, and I have mixed feelings about ranked choice voting, to be really honest with you. It is not something that we have talked a whole lot about in the state of Iowa. There is different states who have had different conversations about it. But I would say that at this point in time, I think we need to make sure that we're preserving our current election system, and that having these robust conversations in the public would be of great benefit so that we can continue to wrestle out what would be going forward the best way of making sure that the representatives we are electing are, a reflection of our communities and are the ones in which our communities are lifting up.
Thank you. Representative Eisenhart.
Well, as Representative James indicated, this is not there's no live discussion on this in Iowa. I'd be very amazed if it becomes one in the near future. We do have access, though, to tremendous resources. One organization in particular I'm a part of is called the National Conference of State Legislatures. If and when this becomes a subject of discussion, or even now, if people want to know more about it and take the lead, grassroots lead, in organizing to get this type of change, we can certainly provide you with the information about how it has worked, where it has worked in other states. That's where you start. What has been the experience of others? My personal opinion is, with the many changes we've made in Iowa over the past 2 to 4 years and how elections work that are confusing to people already at a minimum, I think to start a discussion how we would radically change the system even further would be a greater deterrent to participation. It's something that requires a lot of thought and maybe a 2 or 4, even 6-year runway to put in place.
Thank you. Mr. Townsend.
I'm not really that knowledgeable on the ranked choice voting, but I would agree with we need to protect our voter rights and the way the elections happen now. And I guess I feel like more changes at this point in time would not be the best idea. I feel like, it could be something that I'd have to educate myself on because I really don't know enough about it to have a very strong opinion.
Thank you. Ms. Wieserek?
I actually would be open to it. I think, of course, we would need time to process it, but I think it would be especially important for people who are so frustrated with the two-party system, and people don't want to vote for a third party because they fear that their vote doesn't count. And I think it would be a good way to transition into having more parties rather than just the two, because people would be willing to vote for a third party, someone that maybe is their first choice, and know that, it wouldn't be a spoiler for another candidate, for their second place candidate. So I think it would be a really great thing to at least look into and maybe to plan out. I think Minnesota has some good steps in place. They've been tackling this problem for a while now, and I think we could look to them for more advice.
Thank you. This next question is about health care. And we'll start with Representative Eisenhart, please. How can Iowa attract maternal health professionals and address the state's OB-GYN deserts?
I serve on the Health and Human Services Subcommittee, at least I have for the past 2 years in the Iowa House. And it would need to start with a robust discussion about that problem. This and many other issues of dire concern, especially to rural Iowa, are simply ignored. We don't have discussions or even speakers to address many of these issues when we're in session. We don't have our oversight committee meeting at all on any topic, unless it's to beat up on educators. And so creating some platforms and opportunities where we create understanding about the issue. And that's where I think we can play a role as legislators. We have convening power. We can bring people together in our community and have those discussions. I'm not sure it's as big of a concern in Dubuque County as it is elsewhere. But one place we can start is to stop cutting those benefits to begin with. The governor in this case financed the expansion to 12 months maternal and child health after postpartum by taking away benefits from many women who were getting them for even 2 months. The solution was simple, in my opinion. Keep everybody whole, no matter your income. You get the 2 months. If you got the 2 months before, you can continue to get the 2 months in the future. Folks underneath that threshold, let's start by expanding that coverage to 12 months and phase it in. So I don't think this administration has a serious commitment to addressing that issue.
Thank you. Mr. Townsend?
I feel like this is something that I think awareness really needs to be raised on with the general public, because I think, I didn't know much about it until I started running for office and I started hearing about the desert that is out there. And I didn't even realize it until, like I said, I started running for office. But I feel like, we have to have some friendlier laws to, make it more feasible for those places to exist, and if in the rural areas, if they need support, then we need to support those hospitals and clinics and stuff to keep those services available for everyone. I do agree with Mr. Eisenhart that this current administration doesn't seem too interested in caring about those services out in the rural areas.
Thank you. Ms. Wieserek?
I would agree. I think that increasing benefits for new moms would be good. I think also maybe taking a look at the 6-week abortion ban. I think we already have had a lack. We're already 50th in the nation for OBGYNs per capita, and that was before the abortion ban went into effect. So I think maybe looking at, what do we do with that? Are there possibilities? I don't think we're going to be drawing additional doctors to the area with that. I think we could work with universities to perhaps recruit and potentially retain more doctors in our areas. And I do think, we need to develop some incentives to have doctors and health professionals coming into rural areas especially.
Thank you. Representative James.
In addition to being an OBGYN, desert now that I was facing these realities, we also are the 7th worst state for active physicians per capita, right? So this isn't just about the fact that we're the worst state in the country for the amount of OBGYNs here per capita. We're the 7th worst state for active physicians per capita. This is a bleak healthcare reality that we're facing that Iowa Republicans are not taking seriously. Instead, they're actually doing the opposite. They're politicizing medical procedures like abortion. So first and foremost, we can do things like stop politicizing medical procedures. We can regulate pregnancy clinics that are offering up misleading and unscientific information. And we can continue to push on funding for pre- and postnatal care, not to mention the fact that we have disproportionately high rates of Black maternal death in our state as well. So we have a ton of work when it comes to, supporting and providing services for women. We talk about Iowa as a state where we want to recruit and retain and, have our kids and grandkids build their lives and their families here. We cannot do that if we cannot take seriously economic opportunity for those families, healthcare for the women who want to bring children and families who want to bring children into their households, and then provide a number of services to help those kids grow, like education. So we have a lot of work to do.
Thank you. So as a follow-up, and in a way, some of you have already answered this, but just to make it clear, and we'll begin with Mr. Townsend. Do you support the Iowa 6-week abortion ban? And if not, what changes should be made?
No, I don't support the 6-week abortion ban. I feel like a lot of times a woman probably doesn't even know she's pregnant in 6 weeks. I also feel like as a legislator, it's not my business on what a woman is and her family is going through. So I feel like those decisions should be between a woman, her doctor, her family, and God, and that I shouldn't really be included in that decision. I feel pretty strongly that those are oftentimes healthcare decisions, especially when you look at abortions after 6 months or 5 months or whatever. No woman carries a baby for that long and then just decides I want to have an abortion for birth control. They're doing that most times because of some horrible decision that had to be made. And again, I don't feel like that's my business to be telling them what they have to do.
Thank you. Ms. Wieserek.
I do not think that it is an issue that should be legislated. I think that if you don't have rights over your own body, then you really don't have any rights at all. I also don't think that bans really are a good solution. I think that they are very narrow and they come with lots of unintended consequences. So I think that there are other solutions and strategies and a multitude of things that could be done to support women who have unwanted pregnancies. So I just think that the 6-week ban is not a good legislation.
Thank you. Representative James.
Thank you for the question. I believe that politicians are never more qualified than patients and providers to make personal medical decisions. Just want to be very clear. Politicians are never more qualified than a patient and a provider to make a medical decision. The legislation that we have seen come through the Iowa Capitol is dangerous and will result in the death of women. We've seen abortion bans now across the country taking into effect after the fall of Roe versus Wade, and we have seen women die. We have seen women lose their lives. We have seen unspeakable damage to women and families. And again, it has everything to do with politically partisan politicization of a medical procedure. And I'm not alone in that. 64% of Iowans believe that abortion should be legal. 71% of women in Iowa. That number gets even higher, believe that women should be legal, or that abortion should be legal. And I want to point out that the ban, if our Republican colleagues had the courage to show up and actually speak about this very important question, if they had the courage to do that, they would probably say, well, there are exceptions for rape and incest. Those exceptions will not work, primarily because there is, if you ever know anything about trauma, if you ever know anything about rape or incest, folks aren't going to report those in the amount of time that the legislature allocated to them, and they won't be able to prove it either. Thank you.
Representative Eisenhart, please.
I would like to yield my time to Representative James.
Thank you.
I get fired up, don't I?
If we are serious about promoting successful pregnancies, there are many, many, many things we could be doing that we simply aren't talking about that would be much more effective at achieving those goals. We've already talked about one, maternal and child health. I voted against this legislation, and for me, it's really very simple. Living my life is hard enough. I don't want anybody else interfering in my personal, medical, and moral decision-making. I'm not about to get involved in anybody else's decision-making as a person, much less as an elected official using the force of law.
Thank you. Staying on the healthcare topic, Iowa has the second highest rate of cancer in the nation. Our agricultural practices and chemicals play a part. What do you see legislators' role? What do you see as legislators' role? And we'll begin with Ms. Wieserek, please.
I do think that we need to look into possible solutions and what is causing the cancer. I personally have 3 neighbors who have cancer and 1 who recently passed away. So I know that it is a problem. I'm not sure what the cause is. I think we need to, first of all, figure out what are the causes. We need to work with scientists, maybe universities, to find out what is causing the cancer. And then we need to look to, okay, how can we address that through legislation or through education, different solutions. Yeah, that's
Thank you.
all I have.
Representative James.
Sure, thank you for the question. We all know and love someone who has died of cancer. I know that the Democratic community is grieving because of a recent death of one of our members who we dearly loved. This issue hits home for all of us in many different ways, and it's one that we ought to be taking very seriously. We're seeing that the first peer-reviewed study around pesticides and cancer rates has come out. I have not had a chance to really deeply look at that particular study. We have 2 representatives in the Democratic caucus in the House that are physicians who are doing a lot of work on this particular issue. This past legislative session, we put forward an amendment to actually put some significant money behind childhood cancer research, and I think we need to start having honest conversations. Now, as Democrats are doing that and putting that forward, Iowa Senate Republicans are doing the opposite. They're passing a bill that would remove Bayer, the producer of Roundup, their legal liability if one of their users receives cancer. So again, the Republican-led legislature, I'm not sure if you've caught on at this very moment, is so deeply entrenched in special interests and big corporate dollars that they are completely dismissing some of the most significant problems in our states. The second highest cancer rate in the country and number 1 for the increasing number of cancer rates. It's time for a change.
Thank you. Representative Eisenhart.
Representative James did a good job at summarizing the current state of discussion in the legislature. I am encouraged by the fact that our University of Iowa College of Public Health and College of Medicine have been very outspoken about these issues, because in recent years, the Republican majority has intimidated many of our public universities into not speaking up about very serious problems for fear of losing their appropriations. We've seen that in the agriculture area. One of them is money that has been going to the University of Iowa for water quality monitoring. And much of that is in Northeast Iowa, where we will be, I think, seeing some research coming out about drinking water quality and potential contamination from agricultural sources. If we're anything like Wisconsin, and I think we are because we're in the same driftless situation, we're going to see some serious problems. I'm encouraged by the fact that our doctor, Austin Baith of Des Moines, is our ranking member on the Environmental Protection Committee. So we will see a very close examination between the role of environmental contamination and health with these cancer rates. Question is, will there be a will to do something about it? I don't believe that is the case until we see change in the Iowa legislature.
Thank you. Mr. Townsend.
Yeah, this is another one of them problems that's pretty complex, really, when you get down to it. I've had conversations with, with some attorneys that were telling me about what Mrs. James was talking about with the removal of the, basically giving immunity to chemical companies for things that they had done wrong, and that just doesn't seem right to me. There should be consequences if you're, polluting. As we said, everyone here has lost loved ones, friends, relatives to this disease, and whatever studies we can do, whatever we can do to try and figure out what the problem is, clean it up. I think we need to be doing that instead of trying to give immunity to the very companies that are doing it.
Thank you. So we'll begin with Ms. James for this question. Iowa has an aging population. Some nursing homes have been closing. What can be done to provide quality care and retain adequate staffing?
There's so much that could be done. Thank you for this question. I think as someone who is both a mom and someone who also has aging parents, right, there is a lot of concern about how our state is addressing the needs of these two unique populations. We see, again, I mentioned earlier that we've got a massive problem when it comes to brain drain. Young people are taking economic opportunities in other parts of our country, which is a workforce-related issue. And so if you think about, and Iowa has an aging population. So if you think about the fact that Iowa's population is aging and we're losing young people to different states for other kinds of economic opportunities, we're gonna continue to be in a rough spot when it comes to providing services for aging families. Now, I would say this, the first thing we can start with is you saw that we need more inspectors in nursing homes to make sure that our current facilities are actually following the law and doing right by their patients and providing the best care that they absolutely can. And then I think we need to continue to really push on funding and reimbursement rates for these places, but we also can help families age in place. We have some data and information about folks that is really a very healthy alternative to a nursing home is to age in place. And we can do things like provide grant-funded programs for wheelchair ramps up to a front door, or installing more accessible bathtubs and showers in homes to allow for folks who are aging in place to have, natural ways to overcome some barriers. So there's lots of ways to work on this issue.
Thank you. Representative Eisenhart.
Well, the structural problems we have in place that have been referred to are very difficult to navigate when you're chasing your young people out of the state and your elderly parents remain behind. That family network to help you manage that process. In my family, it was our grandma moved in with us, and until her very last months, she stayed with us and we took care of her. That's not a problem. That's not possible when you're breaking up families and forcing people to move out of the state because our quality of life is not appealing enough. So there are connections between the broader issues that are taking place and this issue. I think we need to be very careful because the reality can be very different from one nursing home to the next. We hear a lot of stories about tragedies and understaffing and situations that occur because of that. We're pretty lucky in Dubuque. We have a lot of really good nursing home and retirement facilities. Most of them are nonprofit, and they're locally led. The folks who seem to have the problem are the corporately owned folks, and many of them in rural Iowa, where they're trying to extract as much money out of the system as they can and perhaps skimp on care. I think this is something we can do, again, where there needs to be a very significant commitment to doing research and long-term planning, which has simply been missing since I came into the legislature.
Thank you. Mr. Townsend?
Yeah, I feel like I do agree with Representatives James and Eisenhart about that the family system, the family structure that, like when I grew up, my grandparents weren't in the best of health and they lived on a farm, and we basically did all the farm work and from the time I can remember to help them stay on the farm, and then my mom and my dad basically took care of them until they got to be at a very old age. I feel like one of the problems that we're having is trying to have enough staffing in the nursing homes, and then for those workers to have be treated well enough to want to stay there. And I feel like a lot of those jobs are pretty low wage, and so they need to have better wages, better benefits to try and keep the workers there so that the people that are in those facilities can get better treatment. And then I agree that we should have some type of a long-term plan to seriously address this problem.
Thank you. Ms. Wieserek?
Yeah, I would echo a lot of the things. I guess maybe something I could add that hasn't been touched too much is the private equity that has different companies have come in and under the guise of either helping to be more efficient with the home or the entity, and sometimes gutting and not maybe selling off the land or selling off assets, cutting workers, and then leaving the nursing home with payments, lack of staff, or possibly even going bankrupt, and then not having that availability or without that service then. So I think maybe looking into that, looking into those companies where decisions are made hundreds of miles away. I know we were in a situation where a loved one was in a more of an independent home, but similar to a nursing home. And the people who worked there were amazing. They did a great job and were very caring, but oftentimes they didn't have control over the decisions that were being made, and their hands were tied as far as some of those things. So I think looking into, how are those regulations, affecting the care of our loved ones.
Thank you. Again, the question will be directed to all the candidates. We'll begin with Mr. Townsend. What was the motivation behind banning books in public schools and libraries, and do you think it's working?
What was the motivation? I don't know, because I've heard for years that, our teachers are trying to indoctrinate our kids and all kinds of other crazy theories. Teachers are, devil worshipers or whatever. It just seems like, anything to try and help our children from getting educated seems to be the goal of some people. And no, I don't think it's going to work. I feel like the people that should be making those decisions are the school boards, the administrators, the professionals that teach our kids should be the ones making the decisions on what their curriculum ought to be, what they're learning while they're in school, what the curriculum is. As a legislator, I don't think I should be the one telling people how the school should be educating their kids.
Thank you. Ms. Wieserek?
I also really don't know what the motivation would be. I don't understand book bans. I think, typically when something is banned, then it's much more desirable. I know kids who, what is banned? Let's go purchase those books or get them from wherever we can. So I don't think book banning is effective. I'm not sure, I don't understand the intentions. I do think that parents have always had say. Being an educator, I know that in schools, teachers are not trying to indoctrinate your children. There are really good, loving people who are in it for the right reasons and just want to educate your children and help them to grow up to be great citizens and great people. And I don't think there's, I just think that, if it's an indoctrination sense, then it's definitely wrong.
Thank you. Ms. Representative James.
Sure. I'm not going to spend much time trying to guess why Republicans are so fired up about this. I don't know if you are aware, but in Dubuque Community School Districts and across the state, there is a procedure in place that any parent at any point in time can raise a concern about a book available to their child. And I do think that that is a vitally important process because I am a parent and I believe that I should have a say in my child's education, but that I trust the educators and those who are experienced and knowledgeable and have a deep understanding of literature, an understanding that I may not have. But having a process where I can raise a concern and at the end of the day have a final say as to whether or not my child reads a book in school has already been in place. So when there is this procedure in place for a parent to say that they don't want their child to be removed or want their child to be removed from exposure to this, the only thing I can guess is that this is just simply a fear-mongering strategy to get a Republican base misinformed and misled about literature. And we've seen book bans and censorship happen throughout history. The outcome is never good. And so part of what I want to say is that we trust teachers and parents to be in conversation with each other, and I'm deeply thankful to our public education system that has processes in place to engage and give parents an opportunity to work alongside teachers and educators when it comes to their kids.
Thank you. Representative Eisenhart.
I have a list in front of me of 16 pieces of legislation that have been Republican priorities over the last 2 years in particular, and the first one on the list is ban books, as it happens. It's unfortunate that we don't have others here at the table who could speak to their own motivations in bringing this up and supporting it. I think to be simple and direct, it's to create a campaign issue for themselves that they can run on. It's a formula we've seen taking place around the country. It's a page out of a playbook that's not unique to Iowa. They've found through polling that if they throw this piece of red meat out there at election time, that it can gin up voters and drive wedges and create arguments and public discussions, again, over issues that are not real. And the reason they're not real is because we, in Iowa in particular, because we have elected school boards and superintendents who are educated at University of Northern Iowa and many places with departments of education, teachers, principals who know what they're doing. I would venture to say, unless you're a teacher like Sue Cahill, who sits in front of me in the Iowa House, that 99% of state legislators do not know what they're doing when it comes to figuring out what books should be part of a public school curriculum.
Thank you. We'll start with Ms. Wieserek. What do you see as the outcome of redirecting AEA funding?
Well, I'm really concerned about it. I think not only removing the funding or, changing the funding, but I think it will make the services very disjointed. As a school principal, I knew that I could email, if we had a kiddo who was struggling with, say, comprehension or understanding, we could get support through the AEA, and I would have to send one email and we would correspond, and we could go through a series of assessments, and we could pull in other people. Maybe, okay, we don't think it's a reading problem, maybe it's a speech problem, and then the speech pathologist would be contacted and would come in and do assessments and things like that. And now what worries me is that schools are going to have to negotiate all of these services one by one. Do I have to pay you by the hour? Do I have to pay your transportation? Okay, now do I have to pay these other services? And I feel like it will be very disjointed. I think it will cost more money. And it just was, to me, that was a problem or a solution that was looking for a problem, that no one was asking for that. 1% of people, less than 1% of people, when giving public input, said, yes, vote for this. And most of the Republican legislators, representatives, and senators did vote for it, despite the fact that no one else wanted it.
Thank you. Representative James.
I want to echo everything that Ms. Wieserich said. I don't know if you know this, but Carolyn is actually a former educator and a former principal, right? If there's anyone who gets and understands the needs of kids in an academic setting in a school, it's Carolyn. And she is right on that these cuts, which were a $33 million cut to our AEA services, plus a mixing around of funds, kind of moving a shell game, if you will, of funds, has resulted in 429 fewer employees in the AEA system. This piece of legislation, which no one wanted, as Carolyn said, has resulted in funding cuts and 429 fewer staff in the AEAs. You know what that translates to? Fewer services on the ground for our kids in schools with disabilities and learning needs.
Thank you. Representative Eisenhart.
Sure, maybe no one wanted this, but 51 Iowa House Republicans swallowed it. This issue probably brought more people to the State House this year than any others. Despite that, we had a grand total of 2 hours, maybe, to debate it in the Iowa House, because the majority party put what we call a time certain motion in place, saying at that witching hour arrives, debate ends, and we vote. That's because the 51st vote, who at one time was the executive director of the area education agencies in Iowa, cast that 51st vote for this legislation and immediately walked out of the chamber to go to a basketball game in Omaha. That's why we only had 2 hours to talk about it. I made a statement in that debate that I believe is true today, and I asked, prove me wrong. If anybody can stand up and say I'm wrong, I'm all ears. I think this is one of a series of steps to make public education in Iowa fail so it can be privatized like the Republicans are trying to do with everything else, starting with our Medicaid program.
Mr. Townsend, please.
Yeah, I'd echo the sentiments of my colleagues up here. I also believe pretty strongly that, especially, I grew up in a small town, especially in the rural schools, I think this is going to create some real conflicts because, the superintendents are going to have to make these impossible decisions of, the money's going to go, the way it's going to work is the money's going to go into the general fund instead of directly to the AEA. So that principal or superintendent's going to have to make decisions on, the unfunded mandate of raising teacher wages. And am I going to try and keep this teacher, or am I going to, provide the same AEA services? And as Representative James said, a lot of the AEA employees have already quit because they can see the writing on the wall. And it seems to me like in this environment, we should be propping up our folks with special needs instead of attacking them. And it seems like we do nothing but cut the services that the most vulnerable in our communities, the people with special needs, really need those services. And we're doing nothing to make them any better. We're doing things to make them worse.
Thank you. Again, to all the candidates, and we'll begin with Representative James. What oversight can be put in place to assure non-public schools receiving public funds meet the same standards as public schools?
I get really fired up about this one. I want to first and foremost say I'm an ordained Presbyterian minister and see an incredible value in religious education. I have served as a chaplain for private colleges and see a whole lot of value in this arena. What is deeply distressing to me is the fact that Iowa has, instead of using public taxpayer dollars, it has chosen to reroute those to private schools with no accountability and no transparency. So it costs about nearly $8,000 to send a child to school. And what happens is, in the system that it currently is, you receive an $8,000 voucher to go into a separate account if you want to apply for a program or apply for essentially a voucher to go to a private school. And we have lost $5.1 million just alone in Dubuque's public schools because of our current voucher system. And what that does is it continues to siphon away public dollars from our public schools. Our private schools serve 36,000 students. Our public schools serve 425,000 students. Every year we do a new appropriation of money to the school systems. This year, the new money that was appropriated was double that of the to the private school than that of the public school. And so what we're doing is unfairly and disproportionately pushing resources to private schools at the expense of 425,000 kids.
Thank you. Representative Eisenhart, please.
This issue we could keep going on it for 3 or 4 rounds probably, because there's just so many dimensions to it, not the least significant of which is how are we going to come up with the funding to continue that program in the future without bankrupting our budget and basically making it impossible to improve or not shortchange everything else in our state budget, or to undo the tax cuts that the Republicans have passed in recent years. I'm not sure that we can actually do what the questioner asks, because the way the program was set up to pass constitutional muster, it's not money going to the school. It's going to the parent who uses it to pay tuition and other costs associated with whatever institution they're going to, which means that, therefore, that the school does not have to live up to the same standards as public schools. If you were to put that in place, saying that the parent can't spend the money anywhere but an institution that had those standards in place, there probably wouldn't be anywhere that they could actually use it. And it's an open question whether or not any private school system would be willing to make those changes in order to attract those parents and students. So it's an unfortunately very complicated situation, and I'm not sure it has a simple answer.
Thank you. Mr. Townsend.
Yeah, I'm a pretty strong advocate for public schools should be publicly funded, and public money should only go to public schools. I don't have any issue with private schools. People that wanted to send their kids to private schools already could do that. A lot of what I hear, it's a, school choice, school choice. Well, the way I see it is the school is the one that does have the choice, because if someone has special needs or some other issues, again, going after our special needs kids, if they have special needs, the private school doesn't have to take them. They can say, no, we're not going to do that. The public school doesn't have that same option. So I guess I believe pretty firmly that, if the money is going to go to private schools, then they should have to follow the same rules. But the way the legislation was written, I don't think there's any way that we really can do that at this point in time. And the state auditor can't even audit the system the way it is currently right now.
Thank you. And Ms. Wieserek, please.
Yes, I attended a town hall last week where State Auditor Rob Sand was, and one of the questions that was posed to him was just this question, and his response was that he is not able to audit because it is a private, because they're private companies or private schools, and they have private school boards, not public school boards, so no one in the public is privy to that information. I will say that having been a part of both the public schools and the private schools, the private schools and Catholic schools in Dubuque are doing a good job of educating children. They do follow accreditation by the state. Teachers are certified. However, what's most concerning to me is using public dollars to fund private schools. In addition, if we look at the state of Ohio, We will see what the next step is. And just like our Medicaid that was privatized, the next thing we're going to see in Iowa is for-profit schools. We're going to see schools where the children are not going to be the focus, but the shareholders will be. The teachers, the staff will not really be considered, their needs won't be considered. The shareholders will be who is most important in that scenario. And I will have even more money problems after that.
Thank you. Again, for all candidates, and we'll begin with Representative Eisenhart. Is there legislation you could provide to protect the public and schools from gun violence?
I think there are a variety of pieces of legislation that have been proposed in this state and have been adopted in others that could start to, in very measured ways, create greater public safety, not only in schools, but in our communities generally. I don't see our legislature even wanting to start that conversation at this point. I'll just give you one quick example. When after the Newtown massacre, which really started this conversation across the nation, it was so horrific. At that time, I proposed an amendment to our education budget bill that simply granted money to the University of Iowa Injury Prevention Center to study the incidence and prevalence of weapons violence in Iowa. Very, you would think, non-controversial first step, at least, to having that conversation. The manager of the bill looked at me while Representative Matt Winchittle, our gun-loving majority leader, looked on. Representative Eisenhart, are you trying to politicize my budget with that question? I said, no. Are you trying to politicize this issue with yours? And ever since then, we have not had a really robust discussion about this in any form or fashion in the Iowa House, even though Democrats have offered, as I suggested, very common sense measured proposals.
Thank you. Mr. Townsend.
I think, there's a varying level of things you could do to, do that common sense, maybe a little better control over who can get firearms and that kind of stuff. But as stated, it doesn't seem like our current legislature has any interest in any of that at all. Their solution is to, make it possible for teachers to carry weapons. I actually was talking to someone in law enforcement that was on a tactical unit that told me that, they're now in the process of trying to completely retrain their entire tactical unit because their first thing that they're supposed to do when they enter an active shooter facility is shoot anybody with a gun or take them down, and so if there's a teacher standing there with a gun under their old policies, what would be the first thing they would do? Take that person down, so now they're having to try and evaluate. And how are you going to know? Maybe it was the teacher that, had some break or something and started shooting, who's going to know? So anyhow, I guess that's where I'm at on it. I would love to be able to have conversation on some common sense measures to help control the amount of guns. But when you're dealing with people that all they really want to do is put more guns in schools to fix guns in schools, I don't really know, where we're going at this point.
Thank you. Ms. Wieserek.
I'll start out by saying that lots of my family members are hunters and own guns. I personally do not, but I would support, and all of my family members have had background checks, taken safety courses. I would also support red flag laws, and I think safe storage is really another important law that could be helpful. What I think doesn't work, I agree with Mr. Townsend that guns in schools don't work. I shudder to think of the child that finds a gun, picks up a gun, and I can just see so many different possible scenarios where accidents would happen. I think you're just asking for more trouble having arming teachers with guns. And the other thing I would add about this, having been in schools as well, many of the situations that have happened in other schools we in the office would buzz the people in because it's a parent or it's a student. And unless it was obvious that they had the gun, we wouldn't know. We'd say, oh, there's Jimmy, and, we would buzz him right in. And so hardening the schools, having more locks or doors or cameras isn't, I think those things are okay, but they aren't necessarily going to stop a shooter.
Thank you. Representative James.
Thank you for the question. In Iowa, gun death is the second highest leading cause of death amongst children and teenagers. As a mom, I think part of this for me is every fall I start thinking about whether or not I should purchase a bulletproof backpack to send with my kids to school. Every year, we get notification from our schools that there has been an incident, and handled well and beautifully because we have some deeply thoughtful educators and law enforcement in this area. But there are absolutely common sense regulations that we can do. I mean, some of them were named. Universal background checks, red flag laws. We could do grant funding for extra dollars for school security infrastructure. Safe storage incentives. I put forward legislation around that. Reporting lost and stolen firearms in Iowa. That would be a very common sense measure. And, continuing to push on making sure that our kids have the resources that they need when it comes to identifying concerns in their own schools and processes in place there. And I feel really confident in our schools, but our teachers can only do so much and go so far. We need strong, supportive regulations that are all common sense.
Thank you. Representative Eisenhart. What can you do, and this again for all the candidates, what can you do to ensure good mental health care of all of our citizens, especially in underserved rural areas?
You want me to start with that again?
I'm sorry?
You want me to start again on that question?
Well, I have to confess I've lost track of where we are.
I can say that we've seen a lot of changes in our state mental health care system in my time in the legislature. The changes started really in my first term when the person who ended up leading that effort later sat right next to me. Renee Schulte was her name. I would describe a lot of those changes, while important in focusing and organizing the system to deliver better results, mostly have been about rearranging deck chairs. I'm not going to suggest that we have a titanic problem, but it's a serious problem, not only here, but everywhere. And our system is not while we are making better efforts at structuring the system to deliver care and results, we're not putting the resources and financing into it that will allow us to produce those results. And the very simple first thing we can do is make sure that the professionals who we expect to deliver this brain health care are making the salaries and wages they need to earn a living in Iowa. And so they can deliver that comprehensive care in an effective way. We simply have not infused the money with enough resources, and changing our waiver program, which we're doing now, collapsing them from 7 into 3, while it's a good result, will leave many, many people inaccessible to that care because we are not funding it.
Thank you. Mr. Townsend.
Yeah, this is a issue that to me is pretty vital. I know young people that have committed suicide after spending hours and hours in emergency rooms and not being able to get in to see a psychiatrist. And the answer is always, well, toughen up, I guess. I don't know. But, not to mention just the accessibility for beds, so if you go into an emergency room, what's your answer going to be? It might be a bed in Sioux City, or it might be a bed in the Quad Cities, maybe, if you're lucky. Those things are just, it's not acceptable. And then when you talk to the people with the sheriff's department and listen to them talking about how, like they're providing a lot of mental health and brain health care in the jail, because that's the only place people can get it. And I've heard this a lot on the doors. I've talked to a lot of different people that have said, they have a loved one that has issues and they need to get care, but it's not accessible, so they end up in jail because that's the only place that they can get any treatment at all. And that's not what our jailers should be doing. We should be providing, actual treatment for these people without having to put them in jail.
Thank you. Ms. Wieserek.
I'm probably going to echo what's been said, but I do think, investing in resources, especially beds and service providers as well. I also think that we need to ensure that insurance covers mental health. I think sometimes that's where people fall through the cracks. A health insurance plan doesn't cover eyes or teeth or mental or your brain, and that always confused me, like they're not parts of your body. So I think making sure that insurance covers mental health. I think we could also incentivize programs like NAMI and other organizations that are addressing some of the challenges out there and helping people to get the services that they need.
Thank you. And Representative James.
Prior to the regional shifts and changes that were implemented last year, 57% of Iowans were living in a professional mental health care shortage area, which is over half of our state. And so when you have a conversation with a mom and she says to you, I have to make a decision in order I can keep my middle school age child at home with me, and they won't receive the care that they need, or I can send them away to another state where they receive the care that they need. We're asking our families to be put in make impossible choices and have to face impossible decisions, right? No one should have to encounter that. This crisis isn't just happening in our communities, it's happening across the country, and I think we need to be very serious about what it looks like to hold insurance companies accountable and what it looks like for us to provide more services and folks create more accessibility. So I think what we need to do is more residencies for mental health professionals and brain health professionals. We need to pay our workforce and recruit and retain talent there. We need to push on the insurance companies and regulate them. We need social workers and counselors in every single school building across our state full-time. And we need to get serious about more access centers. So there are things that we can do to provide better services for folks so that parents don't have to make a decision about keeping their child at home or sending them out of state to receive a service they so desperately need.
Thank you. So we'll begin with Mr. Townsend on this question and then go through the line. House Joint Resolution 2006 proposes an amendment to the Iowa Constitution which would require a 2/3 majority in both House and Senate to pass any state income tax increase for both individual and corporate income taxes. How could this affect Iowa in the future?
Well, that's a complex question also, but realistically, that's going to handcuff, pretty much every municipality and county in the state, because you're not going to be able to, bring in the amount of money that you're going to need to pay for the services. So I guess my question always is, when they want to cut taxes, what services are you willing to give up? I think most counties and most cities are running pretty lean at this point. And so, how do you then turn around and say, if they have funding needs in the future, then we can't raise, it takes a supermajority in order to raise the taxes back up to where they belong. the flat tax, obviously, as stated earlier, most of the tax cuts that have happened so far have all come, from, the advantages go to mostly the wealthy folks, and the working people are the ones that are going to end up paying the bulk of those taxes. We have to be able to provide the services that are needed in this state. And so I feel like we're just taking that ability away from the legislature by making it nearly impossible to ever pass a tax. And I also feel pretty strongly that, corporations and wealthy people should pay their fair share.
Thank you. Ms. Wieserek, the same question.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I'd like to say about this is that the flat tax that's being phased in is so new. And if this amendment is passed, it seems like irresponsible to pass it before we even know what the repercussions of the flat tax would be. So, we may get into that a couple years and be, totally without funding for our state, but we won't be able to do anything about it. And I think what will happen is that we will pay it in another way, whether it be through fees or a greater sales tax, or more property tax, or other licenses, things like that. So I just think that it's not very responsible to do that, especially when we're making such a big change already.
Thank you. Representative James.
The massive tax change that we saw in the quote flat tax, which that is actually a very misleading explanation of what it is. It's not flat at all. It's not fair at all. If you make $1 million or more, you're going to get approximately $64,000 worth of tax relief. $1 million or more. Everyday Iowans who are kind of in the middle, $50,000 range, $60,000 range, they're going to see about $600 in tax relief. Now, I'll take that, right? I'll take it, sure. Things are challenging, but 500,000 Iowans will see zero relief from this particular tax plan. And so what the Republicans are doing here is let's build it into our Constitution that we cannot, we must have a 2/3 majority to do and implement these kinds of tax changes. We're going to see in Iowa, once this is fully implemented, challenges funding basic services, our roads. I like to point out our law enforcement, our firefighters. There are so many services that we receive that keep our communities running, our schools. So these are important. We need to have flexibility and conversation as we face different economic realities as the economy changes. So there's a number of reasons why this is not healthy legislation, and certainly all of us want to provide financial relief and tax relief to everyday middle-class Iowans. Iowa Republicans are disproportionately putting relief toward corporations and the wealthy.
Thank you. Representative Eisenhart.
We could talk about our tax policies and how retrograde they've been over the last 2 to 4 years. But on this question, as a constitutional matter, my point of view is simple. Why would we do something so anti-democratic? Why would we give one legislator more power because they want to do one thing when the legislator next door wants to do the opposite, and their vote's worth only half as much? I don't know what else you could call it, just simply anti-democratic, and it stems back to the voters who elected them. Your vote in electing your legislator may not count as much when it comes to tax policy as the person elsewhere in the county. And the other thing I would simply say, if we're gonna, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. No, if you're gonna say you can't raise taxes unless you can get 2/3 of a vote, maybe we should also say you can't cut taxes until you get 2/3 of the vote. Because the fact of the matter is, income tax is the most critical source of state revenue. Education is the biggest part of our state budget. Tax cuts will continue to blow a hole in that budget. And I think this is just part of that bigger strategy to make public education fail.
Thank you. Beginning with Ms. Wieserek. Last night, At the Forum for County Candidates here in Dubuque, several complained that the state legislature gives the counties unfunded mandates, which cut into the county budget. Why is this, and what do you propose?
Well, I think it goes back to wanting to lower taxes for people, and I think that, I also think it's an overreach. I don't think that the state legislatures should be able to demand unfunded mandates, especially. I have been out talking, I attended a couple of the city council meetings in the area, in the county, and that was a concern of theirs. They're worried about, with the new tax legislation, where is their funding going to come from? And are they going to be able to raise property taxes? I've also been hearing that property taxes have been raising, and that's a concern for constituents. So I think that it kind of causes a problem all around. I think that we shouldn't be allowed to have unfunded mandates. I think that, they just need to be funded.
Thank you. Representative James.
I agree that unfunded mandates can be extremely problematic, and I would like to point to that we've been under a 8-year GOP Republican trifecta who are passing a lot of unfunded mandates down to our cities, our counties, our schools. So that is extremely problematic, and they have some grievances there. I do think we're in a catch-22 when it comes to property taxes. We all want to lower property taxes. I supported the legislation that did that. It does have a function that one of the concerns last night was about communities that are growing, and would they be penalized because they couldn't levy the kinds of taxes that they need. There is a lever, if you will, to actually allow for a city or a county to go to a committee and ask for an exception. So there's some things there, but I do think that it's a catch-22. Folks in our cities, and when we knock on the doors, they say, property taxes are a challenge, and what we want to do is provide relief for middle-class, everyday Iowans. I think that it's much better for us to revisit a different kind of tax policy than the flat tax. If we were to redirect all of the resources given to millionaires in our state and pump that back into the middle class and everyday working Iowans, then we wouldn't have to take drastic measures around property taxes because Iowans would feel the lowered costs in their lives. So I would argue that we ought to really rethink that the tax policy that we've seen be pushed in the last number of years.
Thank you. Representative Eisenhart.
For me, the answer is simple. If the state government is dictating what local government should do, then we should either provide the funding or give local government the means, property tax or otherwise, to pay for it themselves. This is just half of a bigger problem, which often goes by the shorthand of local control. In recent years, especially the last 8, the legislature's had a really a vigorous time telling cities, counties, and school districts what they can and cannot do, particularly what they cannot do. And they forget that boards of supervisors, county auditors, city councils, school boards are publicly elected by you, the voters, and they can be trusted to make the right decisions on these things, and if not, face the music at the polls just as we do. We should not be putting our thumb on the scale for every little thing that a state and county needs to do to serve their residents.
Thank you. Mr. Townsend.
Obviously, I'm going to agree with the comments that have been made. I feel pretty strongly that if there's going to be a mandate for services to be provided, then I agree. We either have to fund it properly with an appropriation or allow the local entity to have the resources to fund it themselves, or else we're going to lose services. Or they're going to be cutting other areas and cutting personnel or workers or whatever to try and maintain those services. As I've been told, we operate pretty lean anyhow. It's not like we have a bunch of extra services, workers in these services. So I feel like it's going to adversely affect working people, and then in the end, it's going to adversely affect taxpayers because some way down the line, they're going to have to raise this money in order to pay for these services, or those services won't be provided.
Thank you. Beginning with Ms. James, with Representative James, the driftless area of Iowa has karst landforms, very penetrable rock. How will you protect our water aquifers from contamination from large feedlots?
Oh, thank you. That is a great question. One of the things that I feel deeply concerned about is water quality in our state. We've seen that our surface waters are significantly impaired, and runoff from confined feeding animal operations and or farming operations are actually getting into our waters and causing problems. So we need to actually fund and hold accountable the nutrient reduction strategy that we've put into place, make sure that our water is being monitored. I feel deeply grateful that in this area, in particular, because of our topography and our landscape, we have good water quality, but we are now finding plastics in those places. We're having, again, the second highest rates of cancer in our state. So we need to do some studies and some research around that. We need to continue to talk about different kinds of practices that we can engage in the county when it comes to our agricultural community, and and be serious about cleaning up our waterways.
Thank you. Representative Eisenhart.
I don't know for sure, because I haven't counted, if I hold the record for drafting and introducing the most legislation related to water quality in the state or any other, but it has been a focus of mine since the beginning, and mostly because it was a big commitment of our family, and my father in particular, taking care of our environment. And the driftless area you mentioned is really, we're unique. We're only one of 2 places in the world that has a geography and a landscape like this. So we need to protect it. I think we need to create more powers on the part of local governments to address their unique needs. Reference the question we just had a bit ago. But I think in principle, we need to decide, along with this and many other issues, that polluters should pay. That it should not be the public's responsibility to clean up the messes created by private industry. And if the costs of the cleanup we started to put that on the folks creating the mess, then I think you would start seeing the kind of changes in behavior we need to prevent some of these issues. That's just a general proposition. I think that in the Northeast Iowa, and I've introduced this legislation, we could create a driftless area conservation and development entity, much like the Les Hills has, so we can work collectively to address our unique needs.
Thank you. Mr. Townsend, please.
Yeah, I mean, everybody wants clean water. Obviously, as stated, the cancer rates are pretty bad in the state of Iowa. So, and I agree with Representative Eisenhart that if someone's polluting, then they should be the ones that should have to be responsible to clean up that mess. It doesn't seem like that's the way it happens. It's just, there has to be more of a commitment to try and keep the chemicals and the nutrients out of our water system so that, we don't have to worry about all the health issues that go along with that stuff. And, I grew up on a small farm, and there's plenty of practices that farmers can use to help minimize the amount of runoff of those nutrients and stuff. So I guess I would have to see some studies and some research also to figure out what I feel are the best practices to do that. But yeah.
Thank you. Ms. Wiesorek.
I think always research is good. We can look into what are some better practices that might be helpful. And then following that would be education. How do we get the word out and pass it along to everyone who might be impacted or who might be helping with that? Policy, obviously we can have policy. And I guess kind of echoing, but maybe slightly differently, focus on enforcement. I think, when you talk about the polluters should pay for it, then we need to make sure that the enforcement mechanism is there and that it's working. Also, I think, maybe prioritizing smaller farms and possibly limiting how big some of the farms can get, because I think the larger they get, the more challenges we have in a small confined area with the pollution.
Representative James.
So I, again, want to just echo the fact that we have a lot of work to do in this area, and I think we can do it in a way that prioritizes the realities that we're facing with our farming, with research, with these larger companies, and I think that my colleagues just have said it beautifully, right? We have a lot of work to do in this area. And then I do want to just say, again, Representative Eisenhart is being modest. He has been an incredible champion. I mean, absolute incredible champion when it comes to making sure that our climate crisis that is before us is being addressed, and making sure that our conservation efforts and our amazing assets here in the state are being protected. He is the person that I would first go to and trust completely based on his work on this, his research on this, his ability to problem solve with other legislators. And so I do want to just say, again, we have an incredible asset right here when it comes to this. And he did not pay me to say that. But I both believe in his ability to really make sure that these things are taken care of in our state.
I yield to you all the rest of my time for the rest of the night.
Thank you. We'll begin with Mr. Townsend. What is your position on the CO2 pipelines across portions of Iowa? What about the use of eminent domain to accomplish this? And I'm sorry, I probably should, I'm noting the time, we are near the end, so we'll have time for this and perhaps one more question. So the CO2 pipelines, Mr. Townsend.
I believe that, there definitely has to be a lot of review and study on whether or not those pipelines are needed, especially, if they are for public benefit. That's one thing, but I don't think that's been established in most of the cases at this point. So I'm not supportive of eminent domain on them. But as a building trades guy, I get a lot of pressure from the building trades that, they should, we got to build stuff. But I do believe, I believe that eminent domain should only be used for, extreme cases where it obviously benefits the public. I grew up, as I said, on a farm, and I'm trying to picture my grandpa if you came in and told him that he had to do this or didn't have to do that on his land, that he probably would not have taken that very well.
Thank you. Ms. Wieserek.
I personally would like to learn more about carbon capture. I can't say that that's a strength area of mine. However, as far as pipelines go, they can be advantageous in the fact that they take trucks off the road. I do think they're safer in many ways, so I think those would be benefits. I do not believe in eminent domain for private companies, so I think that's something that could be a challenge. I know it's not in this area, but on the other side of the state where the pipelines are.
Thank you. Representative James.
This has been a very hard topic of discussion in the legislature, and I would say I want to name just the complexities, right? So to capture carbon, we need that for environmental protection reasons, right? We've got a workforce question, industry questions, environmental protection questions. We also have people's homes, people's lives, people's realities. So I've actually voted twice in the legislature to through committee and then through on the House floor, but to essentially stop the construction of the pipeline because I think we need to slow this conversation way down. way down. So because it's people's homes and people's lives. There is conversation about, could you use eminent domain if you hit a 90%, right? Or a 85% or 75%. I mean, there's a lot of things that we can start talking about. What is the company's responsibility for restoring the land? Is this the best way to have, cleaner air and, better environmental impact, right? So there's so many questions that need to be answered. And then I think the public really needs to be brought along. And so I think that there is a place for us to slow this way down. I will say that there are a lot of folks in the rural parts of our state who are against the pipeline and yet continue to vote for Governor Kim Reynolds, continue to vote for Republican leadership. Republicans have a GOP trifecta, folks. They could stop the pipeline right here, right now, and they choose not to. And so the folks who are saying, let's have a more robust conversation about that, are not the ones who are in power. So again, you want to think deeply about how you're voting this November.
I think Senator Townsend hit the nail on the head. It's not evident that there is a climate benefit, and that's why the federal incentives are in place. The closest this came to Dubuque was when the Navigator Greenway project, which is now defunct, proposed to include the ethanol plant in Dyersville. At the public meeting in Delaware County, I believe it was November of 21, a question was asked about its impact on climate. The person from Navigator Greenway said this project will have no meaningful impact on atmospheric carbon. Then why are we doing it? I was intervened in the Summit case. I sponsored testimony by Ryan Clark of the University of Iowa, who said that he thinks that this carbon could be sequestered in Iowa without the need for a long-range pipeline, if only Summit would take the time and the money to do the research. When they found that out, they'd stop talking to the University of Iowa. And so there are many, many questions that are unanswered. The Utilities Commission claims that they have no obligation to investigate alternatives that would be better for Iowans. And the big issue out there that nobody has discussed really is the carbon capture process itself will cost trillions of gallons of groundwater every year. Do we have that resource available, and should we be using it for that purpose?
Thank you. Mr. Townsend. Oh, I'm sorry. Where have I lost? Have I lost our order again? Our last question is, and again to all, and forgive me if I've messed up the order, but we'll just go 1, 2, 3, 4. What are your thoughts on House File 2605, the hemp bill that Governor Reynolds recently passed, and its impacts on local communities? For instance, here in Dubuque, 2 stores recently closed as a result of this. And how would you intend to help impacted local businesses and economies? And what is your stance on legislation of marijuana overall?
I'm a pretty firm believer, from doing grocery deliveries with the Dubuque Area Labor Harvest, from knocking all the doors I've been knocking. Marijuana's here already. Almost everywhere you go, you walk into a cloud of marijuana. So I feel pretty strongly that we should be legalizing marijuana, and we should be then regulating it and taxing it, so then maybe we can make some money to help pay for some of these services that are being affected. And in the meantime, probably make it safer for the people that are using marijuana recreationally. And so that's my stance on it, is I believe that we should be going the opposite direction, and we should be making it easier to access and then regulating it properly.
Thank you. Ms. Wieserak.
I will echo that. I do think, if I'm correct about the regulation, it shrunk the amount of the number of ounces that people could be purchased, and that's what put the businesses out. or put them out of business because their containers were 5 ounces, for example, but the limit was 4. I may be off on those numbers. And so rather, it would have been a huge expense for them to change their containers and to change the way they packaged their products. And so I think that was really it was short-sighted, and it doesn't seem that people were consulted, stakeholders were consulted. As far as the legalization of marijuana, I agree with what Mr. Townsend said. I think if it's legal here, as you said, it's already here. People can go across the state line to purchase it. And if it's legal here, it's more likely to be safe, regulated, and it also would give Iowa the economic benefits.
Thank you. Representative James.
I support adult use recreational marijuana. I actually authored a bill and had many colleagues sign on to it that would create an infrastructure to legalize adult use recreational marijuana, and let me tell you why. I'm going to say that Mr. Townsend and Ms. Wiezerek already kind of hit on these. We want to, one, it's already here. We want to regulate it to make sure that it's safe and kept out of the hands of kids. Right? It is here. We want to regulate it, and we want to keep it out of the hands of kids. Now, the reason why I actually did support the hemp bill was because it would require age limits on the products. And that for me is, I've got young kids, right? And I, again, support adult use recreational marijuana, but we got to regulate it. We got to make sure that the product is safe. We need to make sure that it's kept out of the hands of kids, meaning we've got age limits and warnings or whatever is needed in that regard. And then we could have some incredible economic funding that we could funnel back to our schools. We could funnel it into recovery addiction services. You know, we talk about when it comes to gambling, and we see the impact of gambling and addiction. And so some of those resources that we receive from that revenue gets funneled back into recovery services. So there's a number of things that we could actually do to use those resources to benefit our community. It is here. We just got to make sure that it's out of the hands of our kids, and this is the way that we do that.
Thank you. Representative Eisenhart.
On the specific bill that was raised, I'm not sure that even up to the time the debate and vote took place that everybody perfectly understood what was being done, because we were getting contradictory feedback from folks that it was impacting. It certainly was not anybody's intent to shut anybody's business down because their customers no longer had access to CBD products, which were not threatening their health, but in fact, in many cases, were very helpful. That's why we have our cannabis program in place now, and that's one of the reasons why I think we need to look at decriminalizing and regulating marijuana products, as Representative James discussed. It's often mentioned by folks in the prevention business that marijuana is a gateway drug. I say marijuana is a gateway to drug dealers, and that if we can find a way to cut off that relationship, then the ability and temptation for folks to experiment with and maybe go to those harder drugs is removed. And I think we're one step closer to getting a handle on our bigger substance use addiction problems, which we are also underfunding treatment for, among other things.
We will now have closing remarks from the candidates, please. We'll begin with Ms. Wiezerek. You have 2 minutes each, and if you would give us your closing remarks. Thank you.
Again, I'd like to say thank you to the League of Women Voters and thank you to the rest of you who have attended here. The reason that I decided to run was because I wasn't feeling represented, and I think the people in our area weren't being represented. And the example that I will share with you is that 6 times in the past 2 years, we, the people, have had the opportunity to go on to the iowa.gov legislative website and register our input on these 6 bills. Now, hundreds of bills come through, but these 6 we were able to give input. 4 of those bills got passed into law. The first one was the private savings account, otherwise known as to some people as the voucher bill. 79% of people said, no, don't vote for that according on this website. And most of the Republican legislators and senators voted for it. It was passed. The next one was a bill referring to SNAP benefits. 94% of people said, no, don't vote for this. The Republicans, including my opponent, did vote for it. The next one was the 6-week abortion ban. This one surprised me a little bit, but 96% of people who provided public input on the website said, no, don't vote for this, and they did. And finally, the last one was the AEA bill, and 2 people out of 1,221 said, yes, vote for this. So less than 1% of people wanted it. 99% of people said, no, don't vote for this, and they did. And my question was, who are they representing? Because it's not us. And so that was kind of the first step and awareness of me, like, who is being represented and what can I do about it? And so when I couldn't find anyone else to run, I decided to do it myself.
Thank you. Representative James.
And we're so glad you did, Carolyn. My final thoughts, I remember distinctly the very first time that I stood up and spoke on the floor of the Iowa House. And, I stood up onto my feet and I raised my microphone to my mouth. And I remember this feeling as I stood of just the weight and the responsibility of representing everyone's voice in my district. We represent 31,500 people in our district, and soon to be Senator Townsend will be representing 60,000, right? This is a huge responsibility, and I remember feeling that. And that is why I prioritize knocking on doors of no party constituents and Republican constituents, because it's important to me that I'm actually representing everyone well. I believe that the power of democracy is that it belongs to each and every one of us, and that our voices matter, and that it's my responsibility to actually hear and understand those voices and speak to them. The Iowa Republicans in the last 8 years under a GOP-controlled trifecta have stopped listening. And instead, this is the record of what we've seen over the last year. We've seen attacks on public schools. We've seen chronically underfunding of public schools. We've seen banning books. We've seen numerous attacks punching down on LGBTQ folks. We've seen stripping workers of their rights, women of their right to bodily autonomy, dismantling special needs services for kids in schools, arming teacher, you name it. Every single politically polarizing issue that they can put forward is what they are doing. And as I want to echo Ms. Rieserich's comments, you can just see the record right in front of you. These examples of public weighing in saying, do not do this. And yet Republicans time and time again voting for special interests and for a politically polarizing agenda. We need legislators who will put people over politics, and that is my commitment to you.
Thank you. Representative Eisenhart.
Thank you. I'd like to extend my appreciation to everybody here and others who submitted questions, and to the league for hosting this. I'm actually quite pleased and maybe a little bit surprised that we're able to fill 2 whole hours with really intelligent adult discussion on issues that matter to everybody. And if you want to keep discussing any of these issues, I'm going down to Monk's for a coffee or other late night beverage when we're finished, and we can gather and continue talking about other issues if you'd like. I'd be happy to buy the first round. I have in front of me 16 bills that were priorities of Iowa House Republicans that I voted against proudly, and that I'm pretty sure that my opponent, if she were in place, would have voted for. I have on this page, 21 bills sponsored by the Americans for Prosperity, which is the major funder of my opponent's campaign, that I have voted against, and if they were to come to the floor for a vote, I would vote against, and that I'm pretty sure my opponent would vote for if she is elected. So I think there are a lot of issues we discussed tonight and others we haven't that matter to you, that we should have a thorough discussion as the weeks days before November 5 approach. I once was told by a winning football coach, a storied career, that there are three things student athletes look for in a leader or coach. Are you committed to excellence? Can I trust you? Do you care about me? I think my record shows that I'm committed to excellence. This state can do better. We should do more, and we can be excellent, but we need to break this Republican trifecta. I think my record shows that I care for this community and the bills that I've sponsored and the votes that I've taken. And finally, I hope that I've earned your trust in all I've done, both in the legislature and in this district. Working together, we can still make a difference, and I hope to be part of that team and partnership.
Thank you. And then last, but definitely not least, Mr. Townsend.
Okay, yeah, thanks for the League of Women Voters for hosting us here tonight. Thanks for everyone for your time coming out and paying attention to these issues and asking all the good questions. You know, I'm just pretty much a working guy. I'm a union electrician by trade. I feel like I became a leader when I was in the Navy. You know, I went through nuclear power school. Obviously, I don't know everything about the issues at this point. I have a lot to learn. I think I've proven in my past that I'm able to learn because the program that I went through in the Navy had more than a 50% fail rate. So, you had to really work to get there. So after I got out of the service, when I got in the electrical apprenticeship, work was really good in Dubuque at that point in time. But along the way, with the recession and everything else, work was not always good. And so I had a lot of struggles, especially financially during the recession time. I drove to New York, Albany, New York, looking for a job. I ended up finding one in Indiana. So I feel like these struggles are the things that are going to make me be a better legislator. And it's actually the things that made me decide to run for my current job as business manager with electricians. And it also inspired me to get more involved with the Dubuque Area Labor Harvest and help people in the community. I'm on a lot of different boards. I'm on a lot of different commissions. I could have used up the whole 2 hours talking about what I've been doing in the last 10 years. I'm very involved with a lot of things. Community service is really at the heart of pretty much everything that I do. I represent my membership. I represent all the union workers in Dubuque with the Federation of Labor. And you can ask anybody, I don't care if you're union or not, I represent all the workers in the city of Dubuque. If they call me, I will do anything I can to help them. I intend to be the same thing, do the same thing in the Iowa Senate if elected. And, I'm going to represent everyone to the best of my ability. As I said, I understand I have a lot to learn, but I think I'll get there. And I appreciate everyone's time, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, thank you to the candidates for your participation this evening. The League would like to thank the City of Dubuque Cable Channel for airing tonight's forum. The forum may be viewed on City Channel Dubuque, Cable Channel 8, or Digital 117.2. It will be streamed live on the City Facebook page and website, www, there's only 3 of them, .cityofdubuque.org/livestream. Yesterday, the League hosted the Dubuque County Candidate Forum. It may be viewed on City Channel also. To the audience, thank you very much for your questions, for your attendance tonight. And remember to use your power as citizens, as the League absolutely advocates and believes, and vote on November 5th. Good evening.